Hey there, comic book fans. I'm going to do a contest entry for Comic Book Steve's 200 plus, what is that, 1.5 year contest video. So he's got 3 questions he wants answered. And the first one is, show at least one of your favorite reprint comics. Now, what he means by that is he likes to collect second, third printings of whatever books that have different covers on them. He's a Spider-Man guy. But I don't really have any of those. I don't collect second printings and stuff, but I do have reprint collections. So I figured I'd show you some of that, some interesting stuff. And I got these, 5-6 years ago, back when I was in a period where I got a bunch of these Atlas era Marvel Masterworks. Now I found these fascinating because this is all, the stuff I got is mostly pre-code, early 50s, Marvel, it was Atlas then stuff. This is a series called Menace, and it's got all sorts of artists in it, Stan Lee, Bill Everett, Russ Heath, Joe Maneely, Gene Colan, John Romita, Joe Sinnott, George Tuska, and Werner Roth. And it's all early work by those guys. And it also has, I find these fascinating too, because this is an era I don't know much about at all. They have introductions by this particular guy, in this nice introduction, Dr. Michael J. Vassallo, who's taken it upon himself over the years to go back and figure out who all these Atlas era artists were, who a lot of them disappeared after the early 50s when the comic book business hit the toilet. And it's just some fabulous stuff here. Really nice reproductions. They must have had all the original stats for this stuff. And Joe Maneely was one of the big Marvel guys before he died. I think he died heading home on the train from New York City to Long Island or New Jersey, I forget where, and he fell off the train one night in the late 50s, and he would have been a big part of Marvel in the early 60s had he lived, so it's interesting to read that and to see his work. And it's interesting, I find this pre-code stuff fascinating too, because it's the uncensored mind. After the comics code came and you couldn't do so much stuff, a lot of this stuff is, you get a real glimpse into the uncensored mind of the writers and the cartoonists. And you have other stuff here like Venus. A lot of this is Werner Roth's, who Werner Roth went on to, I think he drew the X-Men after Kirby. Well, this is sort of, I think she was revived for the Agents of Atlas stuff that Marvel did, I don't know, 5-10 years ago now. A really nice drawing, interesting stories, and stuff I'd never seen before. This stuff wasn't reprinted a whole lot. Let's see, else we have Jungle Action. One of the, once again, Don Rico, Werner Roth, Joe Maneely, John Romita, J. Scott Pike, and Al Hartley. Nice lion on that page. Once again, the stories are interesting because the things just happen in them. That nice panel right there. That don't, it's before censorship came around, so the stories were more freewheeling, and there were some interesting. Oh, I do like that cover. Oh, Leopard Girl. But these have been my favorite reprint comics of the last, I don't know how many years. I haven't bought any in a while. Cliff Manson. White Hunter. Jan of the Jungle. Jungle Tales cover. So I find this stuff fascinating because it's a period I knew nothing about. A period of comics, early 50s, before my time, and I know all about the EC comics of that era because they're famous, but the Atlas comics, not famous at all. Battlefield Hank Chapman, Russ Heath, Paul Reinman, Mac Pakula, Vern Henkel, Joe Maneely, Gene Colan, and Bill Everett are in Battlefield. Lots of the mop-up squad. Lots of nice artwork out of the frying pan. Look at that. You couldn't draw a guy getting choked to death, I don't think, after the code came around. Il Duce, the leader, with death over his shoulder. Once again, some interesting, bunch of guys dying of gas. Stuff I've never seen any of this before. It's from a time period that, like I said, I didn't know anything about. Look at that nice half splash killer sub. But if you're looking for some decent reprint comics, this Atlas era stuff is pretty good. If you can find, I got most of these fairly cheap off of Amazon. It's like I wasn't. The full price. $65 is the full price on this one. I probably paid half that, but so they're expensive at full price. But you can find them in the clearance bin at Amazon's. Oh, look at that! That's a killed in action. Another beautiful half splash. Who did that one? That one looks nice. I don't have to. Sometimes I recognize the artist. And let's see, Killed in Action '99. I just have to look up who did that. Oh, that's George Tuska. See, I would not have. I guess that face down there. Remember George Tuska? He drew Iron Man in the '70s a lot. Wow, this is his very detailed '50s work. Wow, a lot different than George Tuska. Some beautiful, beautiful stuff of the '70s drawing superheroes. But anyway, there's the first question answered for you. Some reprint comics. Let's give a look to what question number 2 was over here on the old laptop. It's show at least one of your favorite Spider-Man comics. I've actually showed a lot of Spider-Man comics recently with the Marvel Team Up one, and it was one of when I showed off all the Steve Ditko little pocketbook stuff. I picked up something different to show off of one of my Spider-Man comics from a kid, and that is a battered old copy of Marvel 2-in-1 Annual 2. Look at how battered this. In fact, there's no back cover on it. And if you look in the front, there's SW initials down the bottom. That means this wasn't even my copy. It was my friend who used to live next door to me in my childhood, Stephen Ward. This was his copy that I inherited from him many, many, many years ago. But this is one of my favorite Spider-Man comics because this is the last part of the original Thanos, Captain Marvel, Adam Warlock story. Now, I know there's a lot of you out there who are fans of the Infinity Gauntlet, but I'm not. For me, Thanos died at the end of this story. And all other Thanos stories are just kind of pale imitations of this one. And what was interesting about this, too, 1977, by the way, this annual came out. There's a little date on it. And I don't even think I bought this off of the stands. Well, I didn't because it was my friend Steven's. But what was interesting about this story, too, was it started in... Well, it ran over... For those of you who don't know, back in the 70s, there were no big, long, epic stories. It just didn't happen. Occasionally, you'd get something that resembled one, but not really. And Jim Starlin had to do this one over 3 or 4 different series. Started with Iron Man 55, the issue everybody wants, with the first Thanos. And then it went into, I think there was an issue of Marvel 2-in-1 that it continued in. I don't know when, and then it was in Captain Marvel for a little while, and then Strange Tales with Adam Warlock, and then Adam Warlock, the relaunched Adam Warlock series, and then think of an Avengers annual, and then it ended in this annual. So it was like you didn't know. I can remember, and those were almost all back issues to me as a kid. I used to go around the neighborhood. I live in a suburban neighborhood. You used to get, somehow news that some kid on some street a couple of miles over was selling comic books, and you'd go over there and see what he had and buy them for a nickel. And so that's how I got most of this Jim Starlin stuff. Like I said, since it was spread out over so many series, it was a puzzle. You didn't know. I can remember when I got the last two annuals. It was like, holy cow! It was like putting the whole puzzle together finally. 'Cause I had read all the Adam Warlock stuff. I had read most of the Captain Marvel stuff except for an issue or two, and then the story finally came together. In this annual was the end of it. And what was interesting too, the Spider-Man angle, was that it was interesting that it ended in a Spider-Man book, even though it's the Things book, Marvel 2-in-1. But it's Spider-Man here Spider-Man is the driver of this last story. Because it was, being that it's Thanos and Captain Marvel and Adam Warlock, it's a huge cosmic story. So then Spider-Man gets tangled up, and he's a fish out of water in this whole tangled story. And there's the Thing reading Salem's Lot, by the way, the Stephen King book. Boy, this book is battered. So it ends up with Spider-Man going off into space to fight Thanos on his giant warship, and he's like, why? I'm a New York City guy. What am I doing here amongst all these weirdos and aliens? And of course, at the climax of being that it came from an Avengers annual, so it's like the Avengers are all captured, Captain Marvel's captured, the Thing ends up captured, and it's Spider-Man who has to save the day. And the only way he could save the day, and by the way, that very much looks like a Ditko swipe up there. The only way he could save the day is to hurl himself into the little device that's holding the Avengers. So he basically sacrifices his own body to free the Avengers, and eventually they beat Thanos. But to me, this was one of my favorite Spider-Man stories, especially since, like I said, it was the culmination, it was the end, it was the final piece of the puzzle of the whole Jim Starlin, Thanos, Adam Warlock, Captain Marvel story. I really haven't even been able to read Thanos stories. Now I see Thanos and I go, he died back in that annual. But if you want to read all of this, since it's not the 70s anymore, they have it all, two books. Warlock Masterworks #2, and Captain Marvel Masterworks #3. This has got the first parts of the story. It's got what is it? That Iron Man 55, I believe it's got. I think it even has that other Marvel 2-in-1 issue. It's got some other Captain Marvel stuff before there too. Invincible Iron Man 55 and Captain Marvel's, and then it continues into the Adam Warlock one, which has all these strange tales, and then the Warlock stuff, and it ends with those two annuals. What is it telling? Avengers Annual #7. That's the second to last part, and Marvel 2-in-1 Annual #2. So these two will give you all those puzzle pieces that I, as a kid, scoured the neighborhoods to try and find, so I could read this entire story. And I must say, it was like a eureka moment finding this one and getting the last piece of the story. But there you go, an interesting Spider-Man comic for you. And the last question is, show one or more of your most sentimental or nostalgic books in your collection. Isn't that all of them? But anyway, I picked one out for that too. And that one is The Justice Machine, #1. This is a magazine-sized one too. We'll pop this one. And it's got a John Byrne cover. I don't know how many of you know about The Justice Machine. it's had a few different volumes of it, but this is the original volume. Mike Gustovich, I think, was the conceived and constructed by Michael Gustovich. He's got a bunch of other people who work with him. He's got some nice artwork. But one of the reasons this is a sentimental favorite is because I think this is the first direct-only series I got. When the summer I turned 15, which was, the summer of 1981, a comic shop opened a couple of towns down, about a 20-minute drive away. Of course, I couldn't drive the summer I turned 15, but I had a friend who could. Scream! So he was like, hey, a comic... He was a couple years older. He was like, hey, a comic shop opened. So we went there, and it was just like, whoa! Who'd ever heard of a comic shop before? There was none around here in 1981. So, and I had already, I liked the odd comics. I liked the comics that, not the mainstream stuff. My tastes were sort of the same as they are now. And so when I saw this, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. It was a superhero story, John Byrne cover, some nice artwork that, from a superhero, giant sized, from a team I'd never heard of, Justice Machine, a new number one. And also, number ones were rare in 1981. You didn't see numbers. It's not like these days where they renumber everything every 2 or 3 years. And number ones, number one. You could collect nothing but number ones and have thousands of comics in your collection these days. But back then, no such thing. So it was a thrill to get a new number one of a new series, new superheroes, new company, new everything. So it was like, wow. And what's funny about that, looking at this now, they kind of, though I don't think anyone was copying the Justice Machine, they kind of became the prototype for like a lot of the 90s Image teams. It's like you have maybe 5 guys on a team. You've got your sort of brains behind it, who's this guy here. You got your military guy, who's the fighter military guy. You got your big strong guy, and you usually have a couple of and this one there's actually 2 women on this team, which was also unusual for 1981. That became the formula in the 90s. If you had 5 people on a team, 2 were women, and amongst those 5, out of the 5, 2 have to be flyers. 2 have to have long-range powers, so that became the kind of the basic mix for a 5-person team. And here it is, early on. We got, and it's funny because, and I always loved this guy. I can't remember his name, but he was who doesn't love characters that grow and are giants? They're nearly impossible to write as heroes because growing really big is just a lousy power to write a story about a guy with. Because it's good for villains, because the general power of a guy who gets really, really big is to create mayhem. So it's like when you've got a giant man or some type of character like that, they have to avoid creating mayhem so much that they can't always get super large. But when they do, it's fun to look at. That's why I think there've been so few growing to giant size characters. Oh, look at that! There was even pin-ups in the back of, I don't know, sword and sorcery guys. So you got all sorts of good stuff with how much was this? $2. This was $2 in 1981. So that was an expensive book in 1981. But what the heck? Where else am I going to get that? Ooh, Jose, look at that nice color pin-up of a guy fighting off an octopus. But this was, like I said, this was a lot of fun to me back in 1981. There's the mental powers guy. But there we go. Comic is a sentimental favorite to me. The Justice Machine number 1. And wow, it's nice I haven't had it out in a while. It's nice. I actually just put it in a new bag and board because it had been in an old one since about then, and it was yellow and mucky. But anyway, there we go. Check out Comic Book Steve's channel. I'll leave a link below to it. And have a good one.